Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Hopkins Hour online seminar on meaningful research through stakeholder engagement. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our Hopkins Centre members, partners and collaborators who are joining us today. Before we begin though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet virtually today. For me, that is the Yuggera, Yuggera, Jagera and Turrbal peoples. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tamara Ownsworth, the Research Director at the Hopkins Centre, and I have the great pleasure of chairing today's online seminar. In just a moment, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Christy Hogan, who will take us through her program of research. We'll then hear from clinician researcher Delena Amsters for presentation 2. Welcome, Delena. And then finally, Camila Shirota will present our third presentation today. Welcome, Camila. And then we will actually join together for a short question and answer time. So just before we get underway, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. Now, we are aware that the internet connection varies in the online environment. So if you experience technical difficulties, please feel free to put a question in the chat via the toolbar at the top of your screen, and one of our events team will do their best to help you. If needed, you can leave the Teams event platform at any time and return without losing your place. For those who would like to use captions, real-time captioning is available via the URL that our events team are putting into the chat now. Please feel free to post questions at any time throughout today's event. To do this, navigate to the chat function at the top toolbar and click in the box that says Type New Message on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're having any difficulty with the chat function, you can also raise your hand, and I'll be looking out for raised hands, and that way you can actually ask your question verbally. So all questions will be moderated by our events team and addressed towards the end of the presentation. So if you have a great question and you're worried you might forget it, feel free to pop it in the chat, but we won't actually get to these until we reach our Q&A time. And the presenters will do their best to answer as many questions as they can, and any questions that are not answered, we will follow up with people via email. It's now my pleasure to hand over to our first presenter, Dr. Christy Hogan. Christy is a research fellow in the Hopkins Centre, and she's going to describe the stakeholder involvement process that was employed by the TRACE flagship. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Tamara. So good afternoon. Today I'll be presenting on the crisis study, which is a sub-study of the TRACE, and how we engage stakeholders throughout the continuum of the research project. So this project was funded by an RACP MACE Career Development Fellowship awarded to Professor Timothy Geraghty, and the study was supported by the Hopkins Centre, Metro South Health and Spinal Life Australia. This afternoon, I am presenting on behalf of the larger research team pictured here. So the team includes researchers from the Hopkins Centre, Metro South Health and Spinal Life. The overall aim of the study was to examine the impacts of health system stress caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on people with spinal cord injury living in Queensland. Firstly, we mapped secondary complications, access concerns, and identified problem-solving solutions. This was achieved through the analysis of self-reported lived experience of people living with SCI in the community, as well as through capturing the perspectives of critical stakeholders. Secondly, we aim to examine health and rehabilitation service use and secondary complications over a 12-month period in 2 SCI cohorts, discharged pre and post-COVID. We also plan to examine differences in the outcomes for participants with motor vehicle accident-related spinal cord injury, and analyses are still underway for the second aim. To achieve the first aim, we conducted online surveys with people living with SCI. The survey was advertised via SLA's peer support Facebook page. Additionally, in September 2021, 2 expert stakeholder forums were conducted. Results from both the survey and forums were analysed thematically, and results have been widely disseminated. I also shared the results for the first aim in December's BIB symposium if you're interested in the study's findings. For the second aim, we utilised a longitudinal cohort design which built on the larger TRACE 1 and 2 projects. 2 convenience samples of 54 participants with SCI were followed for 18 months after discharge from specialist inpatient rehabilitation in 2 waves. So the first group was followed up prior to the pandemic in 2017 to 2018, and the second group was followed up during the pandemic between June 2019 and March 2020. The participants completed surveys via telephone. So these surveys were completed at discharge, 3 months, 12 months, and 18 months post-discharge from the spinal injuries unit. And additionally, data linkage was used to record participants' interactions with public health services in the 12 months following discharge. And as I mentioned before, analyses are still underway for this portion of the study. So throughout the study, we've so far engaged directly with 5 groups of different stakeholders. This has included the following: so people living with spinal cord injury in Queensland, clinicians who provide services, support and care to those with SCI, consumer organisations who support and advocate for people living with SCI, a compensation agency who provides funding for those living with SCI, and academics and researchers. So there are a myriad of ways that we can engage with stakeholders throughout the research process. The stakeholder engagement framework outlines 5 increasing levels of engagement. These include inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And throughout the crisis project, we have engaged with different stakeholders across the first 4 levels. So firstly, we engage stakeholders by informing them of the study and its findings. Specifically, we have informed people with SCI, clinicians, consumer agencies, and academics of the study findings via multiple methods. And this has included research summaries and infographics shared directly to participants, partners, and the Hopkins Centre's members via social media, newsletters, and direct emails as well. Industry and funding reports. We've done presentations, including the Hopkins Bid Symposium last December, which I mentioned before, and publications within academic journals and the SLA's The Advocate magazine. Just to name a few. Secondly, we have engaged key stakeholders through direct consultations during data collection. So for the first aim of the study, we consulted people with spinal cord injury via online surveys. And here we asked them about the impacts of the pandemic on their access to services and secondary complications, as well as possible solutions. So 34 people living with spinal cord injury shared their experiences via a qualitative online survey advertised on the Spinal Life Australia Peer Support Facebook page between August and November 2021. Additionally, in September 2021, 2 expert stakeholder forums were conducted with 16 participants in total. This included 10 clinicians representing specialist inpatient and community spinal cord injury services, and representatives from 3 key consumer organisations, including an additional 2 representatives with spinal cord injury and 1 compensation agency. Thirdly, pardon me, we involved 11 stakeholders in the project through the Clinical and Consumer Advisory Group. So the Clinical and Consumer Advisory Group included a diverse group of people, including people with lived experience of spinal cord injury, clinicians and health professionals across both metropolitan and regional Queensland, representing both inpatient and outpatient care, and representatives from the consumer organisation Spinal Life Australia. So this group was formed at the beginning of the project and met bi-monthly throughout the first 12 months. And as an advisory committee, the group was tasked with providing recommendations on the implementation of the study. Their recommendations and advice shared in the advisory meetings were passed along to the wider Crisis-INSCI research team for implementation. And some of the areas that the group provided advice and recommendations on included the survey and forum questions, recommendations of people who should be involved in the stakeholder forums, interpretation of the study findings, as well as the content of and the dissemination methods of the research summaries and infographics. So the Clinical Consumer Advisory Group, were also instrumental in the development of the knowledge translation plan. And this was an iterative process where we returned to and refined the plan over multiple meetings. The researchers and the advisory group agreed on the three main goals of the plan, which included number one, firstly, to increase knowledge and awareness about the impact of health systems under stress for people with SCI, occurrence of secondary complications and potential risks to their well-being. Secondly, to inform or change practice and policy for future health crises for people with SCI by providing timely recommendations to improve system responsiveness. And lastly, to inform or change participation by including consumers and gathering their perspectives on ways to improve system responsiveness and personal health. Can we please click next? We then outlined the specific audiences that we wish to target. So the strategies that we would use to achieve our knowledge translation goals as well. And these strategies were broken down into integration, diffusion, and dissemination and application. And we also outlined the required expertise and how these would be accessed, as well as the resources required to implement the plan. So it's a bit hard to see on the screen, but it was quite a detailed plan that took a while for us to come together with the advisory group, and we've been implementing that. So we continued to revisit this plan throughout the project, and we are continuing to outwork it following the analyses of aim 1, and we'll continue to follow it following the analyses of the second aim. So lastly, we collaborated with Spinal Life Australia on the research project with the inclusion of two people on the team, namely Philip Morris and Ross Duncan, who were directly involved in the design and implementation of the project. They also assisted in advertising the online surveys, provided feedback in relation to the interpretation of the results, and assisted in dissemination of the research findings as well. So we plan to continue engaging with stakeholders throughout the remainder of the project and sharing the remainder of the research findings as they are available. While there are numerous ways we can engage with stakeholders throughout the research process, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share our methods of engagement used in the crisis study. I would also like to thank all the stakeholders who have shared their time and expertise with us throughout the last few years, particularly under pandemic conditions. And now I would like to hand over to Delena, the Senior Research Officer in the Spinal Outreach team, to talk about the Aus-InSCI project. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. I'm Delena Amsters, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Aus-InSCI translation project. There are the partners on the screen who are involved in the translation part of this project. So just to explain a little bit of background about Aus-InSCI, as you can see in that black box at the bottom there, very long title, it's the translation research of the Australian arm of the International Spinal Cord Injuries Community Survey. What a mouthful. So that was a survey that was conducted across Australia involving about 1,500 people with spinal cord injury. It was a fantastic data set, the sort of data set that's never been collected before in Australia. So the role of the translation part of the project is to start to move that great big data set from a set of numbers to what can actually be meaningful change for people with spinal cord injury. Next. So these are the partnering organisations, the Aus-InSCI partnering organisations. So as you can see on the screen there, all these advocacy, community advocacy groups for people with spinal cord injury have been intimately involved in Aus-InSCI and also in the translation project. Next, please. So in terms of the translating the survey results into change, we've conceptualised this in 3 phases. So an explain phase where we came up with resources to explain some of the key results from the survey. And then the portion that I'm really talking about today is the ask portion of the translation project. So asking people, what do these results mean and what can we do about them? And finally, to follow this up is the design phase, and we haven't started into that yet, but I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end. Next, please. So I want to use the example of one of the topics that we looked at in the translation project, which was bladder, bowels and sexual dysfunction following spinal cord injury. So this was one of three topic areas that we examined in the translation project to date. On the screen there, you can see an example of an easy to read, graphically orientated results flyer from the bladder, bowel and sexual function results from the 2018 survey. So that had 2 pages. I'm only showing you one there. But some of the sorts of things, well, one that is highlighted on that first page there is that 73% of people in that survey are reporting that they have sexual functional problems, and 40% of those have extreme problems. And one of the alarming things about that is that very few people are actually seeking assistance with those problems. So that's just an example of one of the things that we highlighted in the translation project when we came to our asking phase, which I'll go on to explain now. Okay, thank you. So in the ask phase, we set up nominal focus groups. So they are online focus groups through Teams, but they had a nominal aspect to them as well. So this means that not only were we finding out about people's experiences and their ideas around creating change related to the problems that were highlighted in the survey, but we also got them to do some ranking of these ideas. So we started to get an idea of which ones they thought were viable and important and so on. Next, please. So the focus groups that pertain to the bladder, bowel and sexual function there were 2 of them, and we decided for this particular topic to separate the groups into male and female participants, just thinking that there were probably going to be some intimate details that people described, and that will perhaps make it more comfortable for them to do so in the separated groups. So in the male group, we had 3 people from Queensland and 3 people from Victoria, and in the female group, 4 from Queensland and 1 from New South Wales. And we had different localities of people across the 3 different topics that we looked at. Thank you. So this is how we conducted the nominal focus groups. So there were 90-minute online discussion groups. They were very intensely facilitated so that we could get through lots of content. The idea generation was really based on people talking about their lived experiences and whether they could relate to some of those survey results and findings. But then facilitating that discussion into, well, what can we do about it and what is important to follow through on. I had my research assistant, Sarita Shaw, scribing away frantically in the background and providing feedback about what was coming out in terms of the ideas in real time. Then, immediately after those groups, Sarita and I went away and we edited those ideas for clarity. So each statement would stand alone and be clear. We quickly popped that into a pre-populated MS Forms document and sent it back to participants. So that was within a 2-hour turnaround time frame. We then asked our participants to review all of those ideas as quickly as possible and to provide some star ratings. So they were very open star ratings in terms of how we described what you should rate on. It was simply, do you think that this is a good idea? How many stars would you give it? So we didn't put a lot of structure around the star rating. We also asked them if they wanted to provide further comment about what they thought about the idea, having a chance to think about it a little more, and potentially why they were giving it a star rating of whatever they did. Okay, so those 2 groups came up with 33 ideas. We didn't we didn't synthesize the ideas in any way. So some of them are very similar, but we've kept them all in the mix. 20 of them came from the male group and 13 from the female group. And really the ideas themselves stand alone as the results of the study. And we have said to all the participants that we're guaranteeing that all the ideas they came up with will be visible to subsequent stakeholders in this process. We thought that maybe there were some different ways, though, to approach the way we discuss and describe the results. So we decided to subject the ideas to a form of content analysis. Next. So the content analysis had two parts. So first of all, we sorted the content, or the ideas rather, into domains of translation. And just bear with me while I explain this slide from left to right. So these are domains of translation that the Aus-InSCI team had already talked about. So we talked about where is it that we think translation or actual change resulting from results of the survey and idea generation, where did we think they would land? So we saw it as potentially being across professional practice, community support, or policies and systems. So the first part of the content analysis was really mapping against those domains. So I've got there the map of the ideas for bladder, bowels, sexual function after SCI. As you can see, it's the Venn diagram in the middle, and the vast majority of the ideas aligned with professional practice. So professionals changing the way they do things to potentially alleviate some of the problems that were identified in the survey. Smaller role there in terms of community support, but no policies and systems popped up in the bladder, bowel and sexual function after SCI. Now, arguably, some of the professional practice ideas really do map to policies and systems as well. But what we decided to do was to go with a primary domain here in the way that we're showing you. And if we contrast that with working after spinal cord injury, you can see that there was a really big policies and systems idea generation in that group. Next, please. So the next part of our content analysis was to look at idea content. And you can see these two word clouds here. Now, this was more of an inductive process, so looking at what was actually within the ideas themselves and trying to come up with terms that encapsulated the essence of the ideas. Now, the reason for doing this is in terms of impact for communicating this to stakeholders down the way, we thought there are different ways we can approach this, and the simplicity of a word cloud we thought was a fairly powerful way to approach this. So if you look at the professional practice word cloud there, that word availability. So that was the word that eventually the group of researchers who were doing the content analysis agreed was the word to describe what people were asking for or pointing at. So there was a lot of professional practice, service availability that represented, but also just availability of information, availability of consistent information. And these words, I won't take you through all of them, but you can see proactivity, openness, information, consistency, expertise, and so on. So this is a synthesis of those ideas and a simple demonstration of availability being sort of number one in terms of the content. If we look at community support here, now this was a very small number of ideas, and please don't think that the size of the words in the word clouds are scalable across word clouds, because they're not. So you just have to look within the one word cloud. So we see peers popping up here. This kind of makes sense, doesn't it, in terms of community support and this really intimate area of bladder, bowels and sexual function, the incredible importance of peers. So information again, openness, a huge thing, and support. So next slide, please. Now, as I said, all the ideas are there in the reports that we've done so far, and in the papers we're writing. We're keeping all the ideas as supplementary information. I just want to show you a handful of the ideas that starred highly. So I'll just read them out. The one-stop shop, have a website with trustworthy resources and links about sex that is endorsed by Australian spinal cord injury units. That sounds, does it sound easy? It sounds easy. We had a lot of ideas that came back that really centred on professional collaboration and professional consistency as being a means of helping people with their problems. So, you know, one of the things about this stakeholder engagement, I'm really very excited about how openly and honestly people express their opinions and ideas in these types of data collection activities. Next one, the spinal unit should endorse and follow consistent Australia-wide best practice information for bowel and bladder management. I've talked to some of the senior medicos about this, and it sounds like it would be easy, but it's not. But from the perspective of these stakeholders, very important. It's extremely important for people with new SCI to have opportunities to talk with others with SCI about bowel, bladder and sex. So that peer support role. And we know that sometimes this is happening. However, it might not be happening consistently across spinal injury service delivery, or it might not be happening enough or in quite the right way. And finally, when it comes to bladder and bowel management, people with SCI must understand all available options so they can work out what's right for them. Shared decision making was talked about a lot, and what was necessary to have really good shared decision making in this particular area of spinal cord injury management. So the next slide, I just want to show you that. This is the survey which I have designed for the start of the design phase, which will ask people about these ideas in reality. It will go to a much wider stakeholder group. Is this idea already a reality? We can start to tap into that. How easy or hard would it be to make this idea a widespread reality? And if it did become a widespread reality, how much impact do you think it would have, so we could start to have some conversations around cost and benefit? And who would be the people, organisations and institutions that could make this idea a reality? Next slide, and my final slide. So I just want to take a moment here at the end to talk through some of the key messages. Now, obviously, going down from the key messages box there, I've got some messages that relate to this topic. So obviously professional practice is the target. According to these stakeholders, it really is the area. That thing about availability, proactivity, consistency, expertise, etc., etc. Peer support came through really strongly as something that is vitally needed in this area of intimate discussion. That it's all very well to talk to health practitioners about this, but very important that there's real life examples that people who can give their real life examples, and openness. Openness, a really important theme that came through. Now, in terms of stakeholder involvement through this nominal focus group technique, just a few things to mention. Now, recruitment continues to be a challenge. This is not just a challenge in our project. It is a big challenge. And, you know, the spirit is willing. The advocacy groups were really helpful in trying to tap into people, but we're still falling far short of working out exactly how it is to get really good broad stakeholder representation. So it's just an ongoing challenge. I'd call this a bit of a design sprint. We decided to do this like this, so get them while they're hot. So we'll do the first part, the focus group part, and we'll go straight into the nominal technique part of it. The organisation and facilitation of something like this, and in this design sprint, is like swimming like ducks. So we're trying to be calm in the way we focus and facilitate the group, but we're actually going a million miles an hour under the surface to make sure it's all working. And something that I was really pleasantly surprised about in this stakeholder engagement was the concept of ideas and rating ideas. It's really well understood. It's very ubiquitous in our society. So I think it exceeded my expectations, but it really helped people just, even though we didn't give them any guidance about how to rate, it really helped them to focus on this. And some of their comments that then came because of that rating process were as helpful as the ideas themselves. So thank you very much for listening. And now I'd like to hand over to Camila. Camila's a rehab engineer and a research fellow in the Hopkins Centre, and I believe Camila is going to talk about meaningful stakeholder engagement in some of the activities of HabITec.
Thanks, Delena. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I guess I don't need to present myself anymore, but yes, like she said, I'll be talking about how we engage stakeholders in our research, and we're going to do that through an example of one of the projects that we've run. So it's the SLA Innovation Workshop Series. So a bit of context to that project. It was conceptualized right after COVID started, and in response to COVID, SLA were telling us that their regional clients were having issues accessing equipment that they needed due to travel restrictions. And that's because a lot of the equipment that gets taken up to the clients up in Cairns, for example, they require the companies to send representatives up from Brisbane so that people can trial and also get fit with equipment that they need. Hannah, can you flip the slide, please? So we took that problem and we thought about how we could address it. So we came up with the idea that we would work with SLA clients and therapists up in Cairns to kind of identify problems that they have, bring in designers and developers to work with the clients and the therapists to turn these challenges into solutions, and then bring manufacturers so that we can try to turn these solutions into like real world physical actual products. And I think you can imagine that to kind of be able to achieve all of these goals that cross lots of different expertises and different disciplines, we really had to work with a diverse project team. So between SLA, ourselves, and the QUT ARM Hub team. So ARM Hub is the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub. So they're very on the techie side. We kind of covered everything from allied health, facilitation, engineering, design. We had architects and people that understand business and business for manufacturing. Hannah, can you flip the slide, please? Thanks. So just an overview of our workshops. This actually extended way longer than what we were initially planning, and because of COVID and also facilitating that availability and capability of our participants to engage, as Delena had mentioned earlier. So we split our workshop series into 4. The first one was about working with therapists and people with spinal injury to kind of come with the ideas. The second one was designing and developing with our designers and developers. Then we had the designers and developers kind of go home, refine their ideas, and then come back and pitch what they had come up to get feedback from who would be the potential users. And then from there, we worked closer with ARM Hub team on focusing on 2 problems that we could try to address a little bit better. And I think another thing that was important that we looked into was really trying to stay in touch with our participants to keep them hot, as Delena was saying. But ours just stretched over a longer period, so that was really important for us. Across all of the workshops, we had 32 individuals participate. So 13 people with spinal injury, 1 family member, 3 clinicians, 7 manufacturers, and 8 researchers. And many of these participated across, more than 1 or up to all 4 workshops.
So I'll go into detail into each one of the workshops now. So the first one, like I said, is about imagining and experiencing. So the part of the research team went up to Cairns. We worked with people with spinal injury, so clients of SLA and also a few of their therapists, not just to come up with ideas of issues, but also to build that relationship between the participants and also us on the research team, so that we could have, you know, a safe space where people were comfortable sharing lots of different problems. So lots and lots and lots of different issues were raised. Like the other projects that you heard about before, we also asked participants to kind of rank the top ones. I have here 5 for you. So for example, hiking was really important for one of our participants. It was an activity that she did with her partner before her injury, and so she wasn't able to do that anymore. So it was very meaningful for her if she could be able to continue doing that. Another one down at the bottom left is a lot of people use mobility aids, and while they do that, their hands are occupied and being able to use their crutches, for example, and when they do that, they can't carry their shopping bags or carry a cup of tea. So they wanted a solution for trying to be able to still use their hands while they were using their mobility aids. Some people like to travel a lot, and they were complaining or mentioning the fact that their wheelchairs can't fit through the aisle in the airplane, and how it would be important for them to be able to kind of board their plane in their own wheelchairs. And then because it's Cairns, we had 2 very weather-related issues. One was about raining and being able to stay dry, especially, for example, when people were transferring between their car and their wheelchair, just because the consequences of like being drenched, not just being wet, but also flow on things like their cushions are wet, and how that's very detrimental for their skin integrity. And then also the push rims of their wheelchairs getting very hot when they stay in the sun, or it gets slippery when it's wet. So they wanted to think about a solution to that. Next slide, please. Thanks, Hannah. So then in workshop 2, we really started trying to tackle a few of these problems. We picked a few from the ones that were mentioned, ranked highly before. And we did that based on participant interest, but also the manufacturers that we recruited for participating. So we had designers that worked in manufacturing companies come and join the clients and the therapists. So we had 4 different manufacturers join us. One was in the field of medical clinical equipment. So they make things like hospital beds and plinths and stools and such. The second company works in robotics and control IT. So they were making robots, especially related to like law enforcement and safety. And 2 companies that are in the 3D printing area. So not just printing, but also designing and developing solutions that can be or would be 3D printed. Yes, so this is where we started seeing, you know, participants sketch things on the pieces of paper. You can see a few of the ideas there. And then we also had one of the SLA clients brought in a prototype that he had built himself. And wanted to discuss with the manufacturers, you know, how can we make something like this become a reality or something that more people can access and not just himself. So after workshop 2, the manufacturers went back home, had to think about all of the ideas and discussions that they had with the people with lived experience of spinal cord injury and the therapist, and they refined a few of the ideas that they had. So our workshop 3 was really closing that loop on the design process and having the manufacturers pitch their ideas back at our clients and therapists to get some feedback from the people that would be the potential users of these solutions that they come up with. What we saw here, Hannah, can you flick the slide, please? Yep. So like I said, most of the manufacturers were not in the area of disability and rehab or even medicine. So a lot of what we saw was, you know, they took their ideas back, they did some research into what is already existing and kind of built on top of that based on the discussions that they had had with the participants in the previous workshop. So it was really great to see that a lot of them were very surprised, but also positively surprised, I'd say, that this is a field that they could also contribute to. And then being able to get that feedback from people with lived experience was very beneficial to them as well. So after workshop 3, with Arm Hub, we picked 2 of the priority issues that were raised that were within the capabilities of what we could do, and kind of turn those into physical prototypes that people could actually trial and give us feedback on. So we chose to focus on the wheelchair rim problem. So Hannah, can you flip the slide, please? Thank you. So the team went on and they really did like an in-depth study into what is already existing on the market, what are the issues with what's already there, what design improvements could be done. And we were really looking for a problem that that requires individualization for each person, but that we could do that without necessarily being physically together, that we could potentially solve remotely. So they printed a few different designs of covers for the wheelchair rim, different materials, different textures, different shapes. And then we took that up to Cairns and had the participants try them out. And so this was great because it really, closed that whole design process into not just concepts, but really having something physical. I'm very happy to report that many of the prototypes got broken, and that's really part of the process. And we also had some really surprising feedback from the participants as they were using, more because they really liked some of the materials and the textures that the design team thought that they probably wouldn't consider. Hannah, can you flip the slide, please? Thanks. Okay, so the takeaway, as a project, it was great because it really showed us that proof of concept of how we can engage different stakeholders within a design and development process into a real product. It's a novel approach, at least within the engineering or technical disciplines. It was great to see that there's a lot of untapped potentials within the stakeholder group. So we had manufacturers that work in a field that had never considered disability and rehab as a market that they could operate in. But at the same time, we also had lots of the clients already had their own ideas, had tried different things, or had a background in design and development that just haven't been able to use that yet. And then, of course, there's a huge potential for us to impact independence, autonomy, and quality of life. And to finish, some of the quotes that we got, sorry, Hannah, can you go back? Is, a clinician was telling us that they've never had anyone that they could ask these things to. So the value of really being able to bring other stakeholders in, and how the clients also appreciated being engaged in developing new solutions. Okay, now you can flip to the last one. Yeah. Thank you. That's it for me. And now I am going to turn it back to Tamara, who's going to lead our Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. And I just want to say a huge thanks to Christy, Delena and Camila for their wonderful presentations and for providing such, I think, exemplars of stakeholder engagement, because you not only explained how this can be done, but also just why it's so important for addressing the real life issues that people with disability face and their desire to be involved in designing, co-designing the solutions. So I'd now like to open it up to the question time. So this is where we encourage people to pop questions in the chat at the top toolbar. And if you'd like to ask a question out loud rather than just through typing, feel free to raise your hand. So we have a question for Delena. Delena, why did you decide to do the nominal part of the focus groups as a survey after the group rather than during the group sessions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And initially we thought that we could do it in the session itself. And one of the sessions that we've actually ended up including as data, because it was just so good, was a pilot trial, and we wanted to see whether we could fit that in and whether everyone had the stamina to do it. But we just couldn't. It would be ideal, because we did lose a little bit of data by people not actually, even though we went back to people within 2 hours, there were some people who didn't then fill out the survey. So the ideal thing is to do it at the time. It could possibly work with smaller groups, but just the logistics, yeah.
Bit of a lesson learned there for the next time. Vanessa asks, and I'm not sure who, so anyone is welcome to answer this one. Is there a plan to extend this project into other regions of Australia? I live in Rockhampton and there is a huge need for this co-design in people with spinal cord injury. I suspect that could be for Camila, because you spoke about CAMS and so forth.
Vanessa, we don't have anything planned as of yet, but would love to chat on how we could make that happen. So please feel free to reach out, not just Vanessa, but anybody else that's interested. We're always happy to collaborate and make sure that we're reaching more and more people.
I have a question that's a little bit related to that. It's got two parts. So just for the three of you, do you have any advice on timeframes for stakeholder engagement and what's realistic if you're really planning this from the outset, which I'm sure you would agree that forward planning is useful. Is this something that can be done in a short period of time, or ideally what kind of timeframe are we looking at?
I'll just say something to that, Tamara. What we find is you've got to be so agile in these things. We had a lot more people signed up and lined up to do our sessions than what we got in the end. And we kind of set a benchmark limit, like that we wouldn't go ahead unless we had a certain number of people. So if we had 3 people lined up and we had 4 people lined up and someone dropped out, we thought, is it worthwhile going ahead with this? So sometimes we'd cast around for another person. So I think from some other things we've done as well, although there's a lot of planning that goes into it, the actual recruitment and sending out material to get people enthused, etc., you can't do that too far in advance, and you've got to be extremely agile.
Yeah. Thanks, Delena. And the second part of my question is, what formats do you think are optimal? So, is it beneficial to bring people together physically? How do people cope with doing this virtually? And do you think there's a difference in the information you glean from people if you ask them by themselves as opposed to in a group?
I can talk about design and development itself. We prefer to do some of the activities are much better if you can do them in person, especially when you're sketching and you need to do quick, turnarounds of chit-chatting and all that kind of stuff. We did ours was blended. I think the first 2 sessions we did in person, but the last 2 sessions were partly online and partly in person. So it is possible. It's just not as easy as just turning a camera on. You have to make sure that you're engaging with everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Camila. And a flow-on question that Coral's asked about timeframe, related to timeframes. Could panelists talk about cost and funding implications of stakeholder engagement?
I guess I can talk about that as well. I think we ended up changing what we had initially proposed, kind of in response to how the project progressed, kind of that agile mentality that Delena was talking about, but that was still possible within the budget that we had. But I think one of the maybe myths is that co-design has to be costly and expensive. I think at some points we also had to kind of play with what resources we had available and really try to maximize what we could do with what we had.
Margaret, I promise I will come to your question, but just while we're on this topic, Leslie asks, is there a research paper on the design, development and evaluation of your project? I think that would be you, Camila. So is there something that people could access?
We are currently working on that. We're submitting a paper soon, so I
Excellent.
can definitely keep you posted, Leslie, if you get in touch.
Terrific. Now, this is quite a content-specific question that I suspect could be for Delena. So, Delena, do you believe that body image plays a part in sexual dysfunction? I assume that means for people with spinal cord injury.
Yes, well, I'm not a content expert, but by my understanding of the literature, most certainly. And I think I'm glad this question's come up, because the mere fact that we've lumped together bladder, bowels and sexual function may seem a bit strange to people. And I felt probably a little embarrassed about lumping all this in together as if it's one thing, and that there are obvious relations between those issues for people with spinal cord injury. But I would love to have had a sexuality group all on its own, and potentially a bladder group and a bowel group. But that kind of, when it comes to, that's really an issue of resources and trying to grab people while you've got them. But back to Margaret's question, certainly. So there was a sexuality was certainly mentioned a lot. So sexuality as opposed to functional aspects of sex, that was certainly separated out. And some really good feedback from some people who work in peer roles about the importance of, your identity, your sexual identity. So I think it's a really important area that we could look so much further into. And our whole team said, well, we're just scratching the surface here, but it is what it is.
And you might be able to elaborate further from this question. For the InSCI translation project, were there differences between the male and female focus group findings?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I think, so I haven't really subjected this to any form of formal analysis, but just looking at how the two groups panned out and the nature of the ideas that came back, there probably was a bit more in, excuse me, the women's group about the sexuality and intimacy. Interestingly, I think that there were some mechanical things in terms of bladders and bowels that was more raised in the women's group. And there was a particular theme running through that about really wanting to know what all their options are. So that would just be my sort of anecdotal response to that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. And Vanessa has another question. This is for Camila and Delena. I'm just wondering if any NDIS members were involved in any of these projects, and if so, how can this information be important for decision making to implement some of the findings into practice? For example, NDIS funding guidelines for assistive devices for bladder, bowel, push rims for wheelchairs.
So there certainly were people who were participants in the scheme involved. There was some mention of funding. I'm trying to think whether there was an actual idea that related to funding. I can't think off the top of my head that there was. There certainly was when it came to the work group and even the pain group that talked about pain. There was a lot of stuff in there about what should be able to be within plans in terms of people's access to exercise to moderate pain and so on. I think it's a very valid question, and certainly, as I tried to show in this stage process, that in that design stage where we're putting forward the ideas for a much broader group of stakeholders to look at that, and potentially where we said who are the organisations that can make this happen or make change. I think that's possibly where that might come up.
Sure. Camila, anything to add, given that you're on the edge of designing new technology and how that's going to be responded to by NDIS?
Yeah, that's a great question, Vanessa. And funders and insurance providers are a huge stakeholder in this area. For at this stage, or kind of this project was kind of a proof of concept study to really show that we can do this type of engagement in a development process of a solution. But we will certainly be looking to engage more of these bodies to really understand how we can interface better with them.
Thank you. Now, Christy, don't think you're off the hook. There's been a few questions here for you, so I'll summarise it. One of the attendees is interested in whether you followed a template or a guideline for your translation plan. So was this designed a priori and you had a bit of a protocol to follow?
Yeah, so we used the Canadian Institute of Health Research on Knowledge Translation, their guidelines, and then we sort of adapted it from there, picked out what were the most important things. So we sort of came with an adapted template from them, brought that to the clinical and consumer advisory group, and then it was the iterative process between the research team and the advisory group back and forth until we finally settled on our knowledge translation plan.
And just a follow up to that, what do you see as the key benefits of engaging stakeholders consistently throughout the research process?
I think the most important thing is getting in early when you can, because it just means that if they can help in the design of the project and specifically saying, well, I think this question is really important to be asking, it means that when you're asking those questions and you're finding those results later on, it's likely to be important then as well. There's no point doing research and then, 12 months time, 2 years time later, they go, well, we don't really care about this. We would have liked to know this. So it's really important to get in early and ask what are the most important things we want to find out, as well as what are the best ways that we can do this with this particular population. And then how do we then take these results and make this in a digestible format? So I think having people with lived experience all throughout every single part of the process is really important, because obviously different people have different levels of knowledge and different levels of specialties and different perspectives. And, when we all have different shoes that we're walking in. So having a perspective of someone who's lived it, breathed it, I think it's really important to make sure that, we have that information so that then we're trying to translate, it's easily digestible for others in a similar situation.
Thanks, Christy. Terrific. And Angelique just has a comment. Thank you to all presenters and organisers for this forum. It is very informative and interesting. And so that's probably all we have time for today. So again, I want to thank Christy, Delena and Shirota for sharing their expertise and talking about some of the realities and challenges, as well as the benefits of stakeholder engagement. And I'd also like to thank all the attendees for showing interest and being part of today's Hopkins Hour. We really appreciate you making the time. It's been such a pleasure to have you join us, and we hope that you can really draw on these great examples of stakeholder engagement and apply that in practice. And we're also really keen to hear from people who are actively engaged in this type of approach so that we can share and learn together. So if you'd like to get in touch with any of the presenters from today, we encourage you to do so. So please feel free to contact the Hopkins Centre at hopkinscentre@griffith.edu.au to connect or request any documents shared today. We will be uploading the recording of today's Hopkins Hour. So thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Take care.